You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers. Welcome to Java OffHeap episode 65. Hey everyone, I'm very excited about this episode because they gathered back together and we have a special guest. For those who don't know me, my name is Freddie Guime. I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. I'm a principal engineer at Expedia, Java champion, speaker, author, and hopefully, conference speaker again since they're starting to opening up in person. And I'm here with my usual suspects.
Hi, everybody. Bob Paul, an independent consultant from Chicago, Apache Software Foundation member, CJUG board chair, and Java champion.
Hey, everyone. Josh Juneau, Jakarta EE and Java, Oracle, DBA by day. Author, open source coder by night. Apache NetBeans committer, JCP member, CJUG board member, and Java champion.
Everybody, Michael Manella, member of the Spring Engineering team, chairman of the board of the Reactive Foundation, author, speaker, Java champion, and curmudgeon at large.
And today's episode is special because we have a special guest, Ken Cousin. Ken.
Hey, Freddie. Thank you, everybody. I'm also a Java champion, and I've been very active in the Java community for many years. I have books that I've written in the past related to Java and Groovy and Kotlin and Gradle, but my latest one has to do with your relationship with your manager, and we'll get to that later. So.
Yeah, right. It's what is it? Number one in new releases as we speak, as we record.
Should I be nervous about, since I've been moving more and more into management over the past few years? Should I be nervous about this episode?
Oh, this is all like the dark techniques.
Wait, what are managers? I haven't had one of those in almost a decade.
You're very fortunate and very unusual. No, the book is intended for people who are basically working professionals and still have to deal with managers on a regular basis. And it's basically the elevator pitch is it's how to build a relationship with your manager, how to manage your manager so that you can get what you want from your job and your career. The book was originally called Managing Your Manager, but now it's been renamed to Help Your Boss Help You, which, again, I'm not as wild about the title, but it works. It's interesting. I can generally see people talk themselves into it over a period of a few minutes. Now, Freddie's point was it's available through Pragmatic Programmers. That's where the ebook versions are. And if you want the print version, it's at Amazon. So I have been unable to prevent myself from watching the new release lists at Amazon. And right at the moment before we recorded, I refreshed the page again, and it's number one new release in two categories: business communication, which makes some sense, and business ethics, which that's weird because when I see something in business ethics, I think now I have to re-examine every business decision I've made my entire career. I didn't know I was writing a business ethics book, but at any rate, I'm glad to be number one in anything there. So that's really fun.
That's awesome. No, and I think that is hinting at some of the topic where we want to go to the juicy bits of a quick lessons learned out of that experience. Before we dive in, I wanted to thank our sponsor. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 450 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environments and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. Start your free Datadog trial today. Listeners of this podcast will receive a free t-shirt once you install the agent and create one dashboard. Visit javaoffheap.com/Datadog to get started. Again, that URL is javaoffheap.com/Datadog, and give them a shot. They, like everything else, they keep the mics on and recording, and the beers flowing for us to be able to record this podcast and essentially hoodwink Ken to come join us for once in a while. So we thank them for sponsoring this show. All right. So let's first get to the news. What's going on today?
Oh, I'll take this first one. I think if you're running any version of Maven less than 3.8.1, you better go and take a look and upgrade, because you're going to have to be upgraded very soon. I think they are cutting support for HTTP.
Right. So, and I think that is like it's one of those glaring things that we completely like did not notice that Maven for the longest time was running just over HTTP. There was a big Maven switch of HTTPS, which I think it caused like smaller outages here and there, like for people that were going through proxies and stuff. When was that? 2019?
Yeah, it was pretty recent.
Yeah. But then now this new version, they are actually, they're finally going to say, look, HTTP as a protocol is extremely unsafe. We shouldn't even have, and even though you can specify up to version 3.8, before 3.8.1, you can specify HTTP Maven repositories. Starting on 3.81, you're only on HTTPS, which, I know it might be a bore to change all those, Maven the POM definitions, but that is a good thing, because going over HTTP, you're very vulnerable to man in the middle, and you wouldn't even know that that's happening. So I think that one is almost like a PSA. Do upgrade your Maven. Don't wait. Maven is usually fairly good at keeping. I mean, if you're going from like version 2 to 3.8.1, then yes, you're gonna break things. But if you're around 3 already, somewhere in 3, then usually upgrading it doesn't. At least I haven't had any experience where it actually breaks my tooling. So go ahead and upgrade. All right. The second one is something that is essentially blowing up in Twitter and social media and all the other tech punditry that is going out there, is that Apple has new sort of like anti-child abuse tech that they're releasing on their phones. For those who don't know, in an upcoming upgrade of Apple, what they're going to do is they're going to have some anti-child abuse technology running on your phone, which what it does is, like, if you happen to have like images and photos that are related to child abuse, is going to sort of like identify them against a known child abuse photo database. So this database is maintained to know to essentially identify child abuse materials without having to look at it, by doing what this I think they're calling neural hashes, and the idea is that if it happens to detect these things on your phone, it will essentially communicate that to both child abuse. There's a child abuse organization and they say local authorities, which I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that, but that is something that they say that is in the plans, and that they will start releasing that on the next update. So this is an interesting stance, because Apple was very privacy driven, and this is not the first time that they do something. I guess that is something that is out of what we usually will have expected from Apple, right? Like, even Apple may look at your stuff, it will never take action on it, or most of the time doesn't take action on it. This will be one of those times where essentially, if you are breaking the law by having this type of material on your phone, it will actually, it doesn't care who you are. It will go in and notify the authorities. So we have to be careful what we're saying here, though. It's not, we keep saying that if you have this type of material on your phone, they're not looking at the actual images. They're not looking at there's no human analysis. There's no computer analysis of the image itself to see. It's plain and simple hash comparisons. That's it. And so we should need to be careful about this. They're looking for specific files. Right. If you have specific files that have been previously identified as being, abusive to children, if you have those, then they're actually go through a secondary screening process to validate that literally is what it is, and then then it's passed on to the appropriate authorities. Nobody's sifting through your images and looking at them. Nobody's any of that kind of stuff. So we just need to be careful on what
we're talking about. We're looking for a specific list of files that are known to the authorities to essentially be child pornography.
Right, and it's a little bit more intricate than just a particular file, because apparently like NeuroHash can survive things like prop, like if you're like the image to try to like it's not the same image, like that particular hash will survive those kind of transformations. So it is a weird. It's not a particular file, but it's a particular hash taken for a specific file that is on a child abuse database collection. So,
but one of the things, Freddie, that one of the controversies, of course, is that this is a precedent for them is that they're scanning not your iCloud folder, the thing that's in the cloud that they should have access to. They're scanning your actual phone, and that's what seems to make a lot of people very nervous.
Right. Like it's not something that you may be posting or messaging publicly. It's something that is on your phone, and so there's a couple of things. Like the first one, I think like nobody in this panel disagrees that child abuse is a bad thing, and we should do we should have efforts to like try to combat it and prevent it, right? But the question is like everything else is the use of the technology, right? And the argument that is being made that get people riled up is that it's sort of like what they call the slippery slope argument, right? Like if Apple is doing this for this particular data source, which it has universal agreement that child abuse is bad, we should not do that. What happens when somebody else is like a government decides to, now I have a database of these other images that are about known quote unquote terrorists, and these terrorists happen to be, for example, freedom fighter or like somebody who's looking for independence on like Hong Kong, right? Which in our from our view they're political activists, but from mainland China, they are considered terrorists. So, like, what do you do there, right? And that's sort of like where the argument is, like, will Apple use this now that they essentially get the cat out of the bag, and other governments now sort of like bootstrap on that and say, now that I know that you can do this, I want you to do it for these things.
And the strange thing, after going through the article, it's messaged as, hey, we're doing this for customers with iCloud. But then if you're doing it for iCloud, what is it doing on the phone? It seems like almost an implementation snafu that you would even put yourself in this scenario. And the second piece that just has me curious is it's like Apple is doing this because of political pressure. Like, is there not laws? What kind of pressure are being put on companies with regards to privacy, or what kind of things are politicians talking about enforcing if they don't do this? I'm kind of curious.
Apparently, like Facebook and Twitter, they had always been doing this, right? Because they are
Google, Microsoft, Dropbox, and most big clouds do this, but it's all on their servers. But yeah.
Like if it goes through a server and is big enough, they will start putting measures. So I guess the thing is, like, Apple has, and it's a weird position because on one hand it's like Apple has never done anything, but on the other hand, they don't have a Twitter, they don't have a Facebook, they do have iCloud, I guess, which I don't know. That is interesting. Have they just done it on iCloud and call it a day, and then say we don't need to do anything on your phone? But yeah, so that's probably where the pressure is coming from.
This is probably. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ken.
Just say there's a summary article if you're interested. There's a newsletter put out by Ben Thompson called Stratechery. You're probably familiar with it. And he, of course, has written extensively about this, and he's been an Apple fan for a long time. And it's exactly the issues you're bringing up. And apparently what triggered a lot of this is that when you look at the number of potential violations for the center that monitors these things, there's a huge number from Google every year. There's a huge number from Facebook. There's a huge number from even Twitter, et cetera. And Apple reports like less than 100. You know what I mean? It was so tiny that it really stands out. And when the lawmakers are currently looking at, these big tech companies in a hostile fashion, and Apple's holding up this privacy as one of their great features, this is almost an attempt at a compromise to say, yes, we're all about privacy, but yeah, we agree, this is bad, let's do something about it. And then they took that extra step and went on to the phone. And according to Ben Thompson, according to the Stratechery article, they were really surprised by the amount of pushback that they got. They were really surprised. They thought they released the concept on a Friday afternoon. They thought by Tuesday it would be all done. And they're really surprised they're getting so many people so upset about it.
Yeah. And I don't know, it is one of those where I guess that's the question. Do we buy the slippery slope argument, or is that a real so the question is that pulling a straws, like,
Well,
or is it
going back to what Ken was just saying, Apple has been under immense pressure for years to help law enforcement more.
Right.
Like we've heard, the drug guys that like they want to start. Exactly. Mm-hmm. This feels very much like an olive branch to them. Like at some point, government was going to be like, you have to let us on the phone to be able to do this. Like they're going to force this issue. And this feels like Apple's kind of like, attempted holding back the tidal wave that is eventually going to come and require them to let law enforcement on the box, basically. I mean, we've already seen, law enforcement agencies literally work with hackers from other countries to crack into these phones. Like, so it's, this feels very much like an attempt to appease the oncoming, rush of stuff to get access to that machine.
And Freddie's other point was there too, which was that if they're willing, I mean, they may say, well, we're never going to share anything with the US government. We're never going to call the police on you on your phone or whatever. But as Freddie pointed out, I mean, they've already compromised iCloud for the Chinese government. They already do that routinely because it was the only way to do business in the country at all. Right. What happens when China says, yes, we want all information and now we want you to search for this? And how could they say no? They basically don't have the ability to say no unless they'd be willing to walk away from the business. There's no guarantee they'll do that.
Like I think the only one I've seen do that was Google, like or the big players, right? Like Google decided, nope, I don't want that kind of trouble with China. So I'm not going to even play on that field, right? But like Apple is in a position where they like China has leverage. Like as a government, if they really want it, nobody can. Like Apple will probably not stand on its way. And so it's then what Michael has said, that is there is all this pressure, right? And it's a olive branch for the pressure that is going to come that governments will want access to our. Does it mean that is the end of an era? Like there's really like starting from now on, privacy is not a right. Is just hopefully a commodity that we can that I don't even know. Like you cannot be an active participant on the network society unless you give away your privacy.
But I mean, think about what's already happened. I mean, Apple was one of the only players that hadn't done that. So I mean, in my opinion, that as far as this specific scenario, that ship has sailed. I think part of the question might be, why is Apple getting so much more crap for this than other places? And I think one of the things is the brand, right? Being the brand built around privacy. But I think there's another aspect that gives a little bit more traction to the slippery slope argument. And it's the fact that iPhone is kind of black boxy. You look at Android and some of the other platforms, it's open source. You want to look and see what they're doing on those phones. A lot of the code is out there. You want to find out how an iPhone works? Tough. So how do I know they're not doing that? If I'm not port scanning and trying to, man in the middle of my phone, how do I know what information is going out of there?
Right. Like that one is essentially trust us, we are doing it. Right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people do trust Apple. So
Well, people, they're not completely trusted. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the security community is perfectly happy to report vulnerabilities in iOS and whatnot. I mean, it's trust but verify, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. Anybody who uses Gmail, let's just say, type an email about something and you'll see ads about that thing the next day on some other page that if I'm going to pick up flowers or something, you'll start to get flower ads. And so, this stuff is going on with the other companies. I don't think Apple is doing anything to that effect. And looking at hashes in this type of a scenario, I personally think it's a good thing. In my opinion, I think we all think it's a good thing that they're trying to go after this
right.
However, I still think it's very private because they're, like Michael said and everyone else, they're not looking through my images on iCloud. They have a bot basically that's scanning, and it's probably living on the device, right? It's part of the OS, and it's going to scan and it's going to report back if it finds any of these hashes. And personally, I don't think that that's a bad thing.
No, and again, it's a bad thing when you don't agree with the action. That's the problem, right?
Right.
Like again, in the US is less of an issue, but in an alternate universe where Richard Nixon has an enemies list and decides to I want to know who has pictures of my enemies. Like that is
Yep.
That is the problem right there. That's but yeah, and I think that it's true that it is a split brain thing where like I am so connected on everything just because I'm a geek, right? Like I have an Alexa and I have smart TVs, I have like everything, and everything is asking me for my email, is listening to me, is driving me around, is showing me where the things are. Like my digital footprint by choice, because I like when it tells me how to go here from here to there, because I don't want to use a regular map and trying to learn like north, east, south, west by myself. I let Google know it. It's like, go ahead, right?
But not all of that is purely by choice. I mean, think about if you were to get rid of this thing, if you were to toss this in the garbage tomorrow, how would your life change?
There's people that are very fun. Well, first of all, my kids will finally talk to me when we're at dinner.
No, not for months.
No, they wouldn't. First of all, they wouldn't. No, I said you specifically, not your family, not everybody, you specifically. And that's the important point is without this, you're disconnected from just about everybody you know. Like,
I mean,
when was the last time you were what was the last time you were invited to something through a mechanism other than this?
Talked on a landline,
I
check any of the above.
And that's the thing is social pressure, social paradigms have basically engineered, if you will, us to this is our life.
Island, and we burned the ship. Like,
we talk about what the government can do and all that kind of thing. Surveillance, all that kind of stuff. Like it's right here. We know apps listen on these devices. We know it's a proven fact that they listen to our conversations. We know that it can track us easily. Like these things already do so much. Like this doesn't even feel like the next step to me, which is why I'm surprised at the reaction. Really, this feels like a privacy ship that's already sailed.
Like we are in a post-privacy world. Like by choice too. It's by choice. I guess it was by choice at the beginning, and now it's by necessity.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Like
there's a great.
We opted into Alexa. We opted into the smartphone.
There's a great talk by Moxie Marlinspike about this kind of thing. He gave it at DEF CON years ago. I can dig it up for the show notes. And, he asks everybody, what if the government came to your house and said, you need to start carrying a tracking device that recorded everywhere you go, everything you say, a bunch of, literally images you see, all that stuff. If they forced you to carry that around, what would you say? Or how many people would do it? Obviously, no hands go up.
Yeah.
How many people in the audience have this in your pocket? They all go up. Like, this is that device. We've been socially, is through social shifts. Yeah, well, not necessarily. I mean, for it's a trade-off, right? We've deemed that the benefits we get out of this are more important to us than the privacy costs we give up.
So, and then that is just now one more of the privacy that you have to give up when you use an Apple. Like, that, again, very very novel. Maybe today it makes perfect sense, and I don't think nobody will care about it. Meaning, like, if it was only about child abuse, nobody will raise an eyebrow on it. The question mark is what happens if governments decide to go further. You just have to be ready that you accepted that by saying, I opted into this technology. I need this. I am fine with the trade-off. So so we'll keep reporting on this as it goes through. I think right now Apple will, even though there was a lot of pushback, I think it's still going to go through. And I think we tend to have very goldfish memory on this. The same thing happened with Amazon. The same thing happened to all the other Office 365. The same thing happens to all these other services. Facebook, and it's just going to go. So at least the good thing is that hopefully we'll see less child abuse, or at least those that has committed it get to see justice. But we'll see where it ends up 5-10 years from now, right? The next topic we have is this is a very, very controversial topic, and I love to have this kind of panelists here because we can talk all day long. So Project Loom, Brian Getz made an interesting and controversial comment about what will happen with Project Loom and essentially the project reactor, so reactive programming, right? And the statement that the Brian Getz said was that Project Loom is probably going to make, I think, reactive programming obsolete or something.
He said it would kill it eventually. Okay,
so even
you're being too nice.
Yeah. The actual quote on the image on Twitter. What is the future of reactive programming in Java going forward? Quote, I think Project Loom is going to kill reactive programming, Brian Getz. Right. The thing is this isn't.
Okay. So first, as the board lead, what kind of shade of red are you?
I'm not. I actually wonder why this is even news, because this has been Brian's position almost since the day reactive programming became a thing. This is not new. His opinion on this isn't new. He's always said that reactive programming is a bad idea. Even before Project Loom, he was not a fan. But on the other hand, his own company, Oracle, tried using Loom and that in their asynchronous database driver. Nobody used it. It didn't work out. And so they've actually recently released under their own accord. There was no pressure from the Reactive Foundation or Spring or any of that kind of stuff. An Oracle driver based on the R2DBC spec, which is a reactive driver based on reactive streams.
Yeah, but it's
so his own company, their biggest product.
If you tell me they if you tell me they retire or they say we're not gonna ship a thread pool executor, I'll agree. But
they bailed on
something that is in the ecosystem of everybody who creates reactive. You're picking a very small faux pas that Oracle commits all the time.
Well, hold on. We're talking about product. So they canceled their database driver, I think, several years ago.
The ADBC one
But to my point, don't you think Loom's evolved since then? Or are we saying that the same exact thing they canceled is what they're trying to ship in the next version of Java?
Well, wait a minute. The next version part is a little bit for a moment. Well, no,
a future version of Java.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear about that, as of course they do preview releases of new features in each version of Java, and what we know for sure is that nothing from Loom is in Java 17. And from what I've seen, I don't see anything even that's early access, even preview features that's scheduled for 18. So the bottom line is while this is a really important discussion, I think we've got at least a year before this is likely to show up. And then, of course, you have to have the community decide to move off of the next long-term support version, which is 17. So we've got probably more like 2 years before this is even a big deal. One other thing, if you don't mind, I just want to point out in the Android community, because I've been working with the Android community a lot, they adopted coroutines in Kotlin because they use Kotlin for pretty much everything. And Kotlin coroutines are the closest thing anyway that I know to what they're trying to do in Project Loom. So you're writing what is essentially asynchronous code, but it looks synchronous, but it's still, you have to manage the structure concurrency and all that stuff. And what happened in Android is that they did use something that they called RX Android for many years. It's basically an RX Java version written for Android. And as soon as coroutines became established, RX, all the reactive stuff in Android kind of went away. I mean, it took less than a year, maybe less than 6 months. Now, this corresponded to the shift from Java to Kotlin as well in the Android community, which that may have been a driver, that may have had something to do with it. But I think that's the part that I'm wondering about, is that we've kind of seen this transition already in an allied community in the Android group. And the question is, will this take place in the Java community? And of course, the Spring people are really on top of this because Spring is perfectly happy to work with Kotlin coroutines and work with reactive streams. I mean, reactive Spring, of course, with Project Reactor. So, it's almost like we'll be able to watch this over the next year and see whether coroutines are attractive enough to drive Spring people to adopt Kotlin just so they can do things that are not reactive, or will reactive be straightforward enough that they'll say, no, this is fine, I'll just use that.
And it's like the interesting part that, when I was watching Get's argument, it was he framed it as it was a solution to a problem that we didn't have any solution we had at the time wasn't perfect. So then reactive came in and solved the vacuum, which was and the problem was threads are heavy, right? Like managing more than 1,000 threads becomes a problem because you get thread crashing and all these other things. So he said, reactive makes sense. It's like that's how you solve that threading problem. So he's saying now we just solve it a neater way. And it was like, and I think he put it in this way, which made me think, where reactive, he said, reactive gives you a lot, it gives you a particular benefit, right? You can run much more efficiently on things that are, on things that are sort of CPU intensive or that need a lot of thread context switching. But he says you're giving up a bunch of other goodies of just regular concurrent programming. And the things he was mentioning is which is interesting because I became blind to it until I hear him say it. Your debugging becomes cumbersome. Your stack traces become messy. Your reasoning of the logic is sort of like you have to adopt this new way of thinking that is, I guess it's unnatural for old folk, meaning for those who always have been programming like with concurrency and thread pools, right? Maybe somebody who is new to this reactive just makes sense to them, but I'll admit that it took me a while for me to be comfortable with it. And even right now, between map, flat map, and flux and zip and all that, it's still weird. So his argument is it's just that for the benefit that you were getting, you were giving up a lot of these things. And after Loom gets realized, you essentially have that benefit without having to give up the things that you're used to.
But he
And that's-
focuses on such a small piece of reactive. So, Ken, to your point about Android stepping away from reactive, yes and no, because they did internally within a single system. But when you look at the distributed nature of it, they still use RSocket, for example,
Right.
and which is a reactive technology.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. Thank you.
And so, like, Brian likes to focus on the where does the semicolon go piece of reactive, basically,
Yeah.
and the thread management piece of it, which there's a lot more to when we talk about reactive systems and we talk about the reactive principles. Like, there's a lot more that define reactive systems, things like RSocket and managing back pressure in the communications and the message driven systems and all these other things. It's a lot more than just, hey, we have a multi-threaded app in a different way. Like, there's a lot more to it, being able to stay responsive, tailor consistency, assert autonomy. Like, there's a ton of stuff here that people just kind of gloss over in this conversation that truly make reactive systems reactive. One of the things that we've talked about in the Reactive Foundation on the TOC is, like, just because you adopt technology X does not inherently mean your system is reactive. A lot of people like to say, well, I'm using Kafka, so I've got a reactive application.
Depends on the
Not.
Well,
Yeah,
you're using system and programming kind of interactively, and I think that's a little bit confusing. I think Brian is referring to the semicolon nature of programming reactively in the context of a single process, where I agree with you 100%. Distributed reactive systems, like, that ain't going away. 100% agree. But reactive programming within a single system where I'm doing pub sub, through callbacks and things like that, or I'm using
subscribers,
right. Those pieces, I think, are what they're attacking with Loom, and his argument about, being, if you could write that in a serial fashion, it is, I think, and maybe I'm just old like Freddie, it's easier to understand. There's less things to reason about.
So I would encourage, it's funny, we're talking about this. We're about to announce the schedule for the Reactive Summit, which is in November. And we are taking up this topic. The person's been notified. We haven't published the schedule yet, so I probably shouldn't be sharing this, but there is a talk that is going to talk about Loom and reactive systems.
Do you need pundits for that conference?
How long do we have to hold the episode where you can just drop the name? No.
But we are, like I said, we are going to talk about Loom and its impact on reactive systems.
Right.
So I encourage people to check that out.
I'll put an asterisk and say, like of all this stuff, back pressure was interesting. Like that one, like messaging and stuff. Back pressure as reactive as an answer to back pressure by limiting the publishing and the subscribing, which is, I think that's what it is. It's a nice side effect of trying to solve the threading problem by having all this sort of, and it's essentially event driven, right? Sort of like framework that you can actually do back pressure, not for free, but it is very cheap to do it versus doing it in a concurrent fashion where you have to have some kind of bulkheading or some type of library that will essentially reduce and throttle your intake depending on certain criteria. Like that I think it is true. Now the question I'll have then is, like, is the price of keeping things reactive worth the cheapness of back pressure, right?
Well, and the other point you're making was that, or at least that Brian says a lot, is that if you imagine that the cost of making a thread is essentially zero, and that it's not a scarce resource anymore, which is what coroutines are like. You could make an app with 1 million coroutines and it doesn't lose memory or lock up or anything like that. But does that change how you write code? But you're right. The reactive concepts of back pressure, and the other one that came up in the Android world, of course, was that structured concurrency idea. The idea of having many threads that if, say, one throws an exception, the system will automatically cancel the rest of them, coordinated in that fashion. Again, it's something that I don't know how they're handling all that in Loom, but it'll be very interesting to see.
It's probably not going to be handled, and then you have to create something around it. Like that's which is again that then it just becomes an issue of trade-offs, right? Like there is a like I do then see a way forward with reactive where you're saying I want to have this kind of features or this kind of like I guess like how do you call it? It is features of this system that reactive does, back pressure and, for example, coordinated a big excision of failure, right? So yeah, like I'm on the wait and see camp. Like I could see, I want to see where it goes. I am comfortable with reactive, but like everything else in our field, if I need to discard that because it didn't make sense, not that it will, but or maybe it will. Who knows with this technology, right? It's just part of the course. Something new and more interesting will come. Now, I'll say that we finally get to the meat of what we want to. And it's like that anticipation. You go to a 5-star restaurant and they give you the hors d'oeuvres, they give you the first plate, but then there's the main course, and we finally get to hit that main course, and it's all about what Ken is going to talk about. So take it away, Ken. Tell us what you wrote, what you know, and then we'll try to see how we can piece it together for all this diverse, or well, not diverse, but like different people, right? We're all employed in different fields,
but no pressure. Right.
No pressure.
And I actually like the
nobody
other
listens to
discussions.
this podcast, right?
No, the basic idea, and what was kind of nerve-wracking about writing this book is that there really isn't anything like it out there. If you look at the management literature or the business literature, almost everything written about management is intended for managers. It's for people to move up in the hierarchy, up to the so-called C-level suite, or become leaders in an organization, or manage change, or any of the various topics you probably talk about all the time in an organization. Almost nothing is written for the regular employee. The employee who's not in the management hierarchy at the moment doesn't really plan to be, although they're open to the possibility later, but instead they're focused on being a working professional. That's the term I use for them, that someone who cares more about getting the job done and writing a maintainable, elegant solution, something they can be proud of and show off to their peers and everything and get rewards for, and who still has to deal with a manager all the time, because the person with the most direct impact on your career is your direct line manager. Now, I'm making a distinction between tech leads and managers. I mean, many people have been tech leads, and the goals and priorities for a tech lead are very similar to the goals that working professionals have. We all want to get a job done, and they just have additional challenges with budgeting and scheduling and assignments and things like that. Whereas a line manager is someone who affects raises and promotions and other resources, et cetera, in an organization, someone you need to be your ally when you're not in the room. Someone that is going to be in a meeting with other managers to say, no, this person deserves the promotion because, and we build a relationship with them that has to be based on, the term I use is constructive loyalty. It's got to be based on loyalty, but this isn't a relationship like you'd have with a spouse or a family member. This is a professional relationship. We give them what they need. They therefore give us what we need as well. And there has to be a mechanism built in to push back against decisions we don't like. You see, the problem is because our jobs are different, then conflict is inevitable. Eventually, you're going to want something they're not going to want, and they're going to want something you won't want. As a simple example, let me give you an example that I use in the book. Say I
want you to use reactive. And
okay, fine. Actually, let's do that. Say you learn about reactive streams, okay? Or say you're a Spring developer and you learn about reactive Spring, and you think, wow, this is going to make my project scale so much better. But I don't really know much about it, and I've only just seen a presentation, and yeah, there's a couple books out there, but I haven't really been through them. I'd like to try it out. because it could be A, it's really cool, and B, I think it would be a great solution for us. But the truth is, I don't know that much about it. And if I get into trouble, I don't know what I'm going to do. So it would be a really hard thing to sell to my manager, hey, I want to take a piece of our project and re-implement it with Project Reactor, with Flux and Mono and other reactive streams. And the manager is going to see that as introducing an enormous amount of risk to the project, and also a single source of failure. You're the only one who can handle that stuff, assuming there's nobody else on the team who currently does it. So what you're tempted to do, and I won't admit that I've done, but yeah, I've done, is that you work on it, quote, on your own time. You carve off a little piece and you try it in the evenings or the weekends. And of course that creeps into work time because after all, it is a work project, right? And then let's choose the happy path. Let's say it works. And then you bring it up to your manager or maybe the whole team at some lunch meeting and say, let me show you this. And of course, you minimize all the challenges you went through to get it working. And you say, look how great this is. And it's wonderful. Now, if everything works out well, your manager's like, okay, great. I've got a new capability for the team that I can market. And we do have better performance and all of this. This is wonderful. But yeah, now I got that single point of failure. So the manager goes, what am I going to do if you who implemented this get overloaded with work, or you decide you want to do something else, or you even decide to leave the company? I'm stuck. So I'm going to take this junior developer, this new person that's been around for a little while, and I'm going to assign them to you and have you train them, bring them up to speed on this stuff so that they can take over if you're not available, which of course is saying to you, hey, I'm going to have you train your own low cost, more malleable replacement. And that feels terrible. See, so both sides did things that made perfect sense to them, but that wound up with a conflict, that wound up with a problem, because while our agenda and our manager's agendas overlap, I mean, otherwise, why were we working together? There are times when what we want doesn't fit what they want and vice versa. So the whole thing is most developers feel that when they get in a conflict with their manager, this isn't just developers, most employees anywhere feel that if they get into a conflict with their manager, they only have two choices. They can either just swallow their objections and go along, which is what the company would want them to do, or they can leave. They can quit. They can just say, I've had enough. I'm out of here. And both of those are really extreme positions, and neither one of them gets you what you want, which is a productive relationship with your manager where you can push back and you plan together how you're going to incorporate this on a project and how you can help build your career. And they can take care of all the things you don't want to do, the political battles, the battles for resources, all of those things that you don't care about. And yet you give them the support they need, like you back them up when there's conflicts in the business, or you give them loyalty, that you support their decisions, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. That makes you a very valuable person for them to keep around and somebody they want to keep happy. So that's what the whole book is about. The book is about building a constructive loyalty relationship with your manager that isn't, perfect trust like you'd have in a family member or something like that. Just the professional relationship that allows you to get what you want in your job, in your career, in the long run. That's the basic idea.
And I think that's interesting because it touches on some interesting points. I know one of the things that I always and I think this is still good advice, right? You should never be afraid of training anyone else, because the idea is, as you grow on your career path, you want to train somebody to take your job so you can take the next job up. Like that is, or at least traditionally that's what it has worked. So I can't complain, but I do see like when and it will happen numerous times where what you think is and for example, one of the things that I always will see is the tech debt versus feature sort of like conflict, right? Like there is you as an engineer, sometimes you look at a piece of code and you're like, you know what, we are accumulating enough tech debt, this is going to break the camel's back. and then you get a manager that says, no, we need to ship those because our quarter goals are down. We need to make money right now. If not, we're not going to be open tomorrow, right? And then that generates that conflict where how do you move forward? What is a compromise, or how do you figure out, you can just put your foot down and say, no, I'm not going to do any features that you asked me to because I need to concentrate on this, right? But that is, like you said, that's unhealthy, right? Because then the manager is like, all right, then I need to figure out still how I'm going to deliver what I promised to deliver to, up the chain. And having the ability to have that open conversation of what can we do, right? And sometimes there are solutions to it, right? Like sometimes you can sort of like steal a couple of resources from somebody, or tit for tat, where they say like, let my team help you, or let your team help me, and I'll let my team help you later. Or there is a concerted effort. One of the things we tend to do is like, we say like, okay, this next week we're taking a break from features. We're just concentrating on plain type dev just for now. The other one is trying to get models where like there's an 80-20 split, 80% new stuff, 20% look at the backlog. But none of these are possible if you just have a very hard stance against your supervisor, right? Like, yeah, and creating the relationship. It's interesting because you're right, I don't see it in books as much. The one that sounds the most familiar is there was inklings of this on, I don't know if you ever see like what was the name, Bob Brian Fitzpatrick book, Team Geek.
Yeah, I think there's a new title for that now, but yeah, that was the original. Debugging Teams is the new title.
Right.
And it is interesting because it was like that. It was creating that sort of like loyalty. The way they call it, it was they call it the favor economy, where and it wasn't necessarily just with your supervisor, but they say like the same thing, like like you help somebody out, you teach somebody new, let's say, or you go across teams, or you go against, or you go help somebody who's not necessarily on your line of sight or your responsibility, but that creates goodwill, right? And then you sort of like leverage that goodwill later down the road, be with let's say that you help another team get unstuck because they didn't know how to do reactive, and you show them how, and then later down the road, 2 years later, you are both contributing on the same project. You happen to be lined up, and you're asking, can we please prioritize this? And they're like, okay, fine, we'll do it because we remember that you help us get out of this particular hole that we were in reactive, right? So and I think that's also like the like how you build that loyalty that you're talking about, because that is sort of like it's so crazy how social we are, that it's such a little advice, but I see it every day where we're creating those little like favors or helping other people. It's psychologically ingrained for us to return the favor. Like it's not even like I'm doing it because I'm fine. It's like within you, not even thinking, you are predisposed to like help out. And and this is the reason why, like it was interesting because I was reading like I think in the 90s, you used to have a lot of Buddhist monks that were always asking for donation at airports. I don't know if you remember this. And the way they always started was by giving you a flower. And then after they give you the flower, you were sort of like impulse to like give something because they give you something for free. And it's sort of like the same thing that the sort of like the favor economy, where it is, we are psychologically ingrained to do reciprocity when we see somebody being done in kind to us.
Well, there was a lot. You threw a lot in there. There was a lot of good stuff in there. Okay, and including one thing I definitely want to do a comment on. But first of all, I really like what you said. Absolutely, and I don't mean to imply that everything I have in here is completely original. I mean, it's
of course not.
It's just more of a focus and a framework kind of thing.
Right.
But let me take this tack on it. the attitude I'm taking is, of course, you want to help out other people, but you don't want to feel like you're being taken advantage of when you do it. Of course, you want to do what your manager asks you to do, especially if you agree with it. What do you do when they ask you to do things you don't like? And that tech debt example is perfect. I wish I thought of that. I wish you told me that before I finished the book. Yeah, the idea of wanting to repair technical debt as opposed to meeting deadlines for deliveries and things like that. That's a great example. So one thing that I looked at that I think is my limited, if you will, original part of this is I'm sure you're familiar with the problem from game theory known as the prisoner's dilemma. I mean, this thing shows up in so many different fields all over the place. So one of the interesting things about the iterative prisoner's dilemma, the one where you do this over and over and over again, is that, like, go ahead.
Can you know, and I'm going to pick on anyone. Can somebody describe it for those who are exposed to the prisoner's dilemma? I mean,
I can bring it up, but if somebody else would like to do that.
So, as my understanding, the prisoner's dilemma is where you're interviewing two separate parties and you're trying to get somebody to confess, right?
Right.
So, if the first person to confess is going to get the lesser sentence, so do you confess or do you keep the secret? Whereas if you both keep the secret, you both get off scot-free. If you're the first to confess, you get the lighter punishment and the other person gets the heavier punishment.
It's an interesting example also of what they call a Nash equilibrium. It's what they call a non-zero sum game. There is a way for both sides to maximize or minimize their losses.
Not talk.
Well, in fact, you can reason out very simply that should I turn in on the other person or not? Should I defect or not? And if I do defect and the other person cooperates, if they stay silent, then of course I'm going to go free and they're going to get penalized. So it's better for me to defect. But also, what happens if they defect also? Well, if they defect and I don't, I'm going to serve a big sentence. If we both defect, then there's a smaller sentence. So if you're only going to play this game once, yeah, you defect. I mean, it's an optimal solution to the problem. Where things change is when you make it the iterated prisoner's dilemma, where you're going to do this again and again and again. And that's where there was a book written called, the book is by Robert Axelrod. And boy, I'm blanking on the name of the book right now. But at any rate, he studied this iterated prisoner's dilemma problem using computer programs. You know, build a strategy and write a program and see what an optimal strategy is for the iterated prisoner's dilemma. Oh, it's called the evolution of cooperation. Now I remember. It's a classic in the field. And when he held a computer tournament on the iterated prisoner's dilemma, it was won by a program called Tit for Tat, which is the phrase you used actually earlier, which I thought was great. This program was 4 lines of basic code. I mean, it was nothing. It basically said cooperate on the first move, and on every subsequent move, just echo what your opponent did last time. So if they cooperated, I'll cooperate again. If they defect, I'll defect again. But if they cooperate, then I'll go back to cooperating. And you just echo it over and over again. And this program won the tournament. And in the 30 or 40 years since then, you can still show that this is one of the best possible solutions to the iterated prisoner's dilemma problem. So the idea is, how do you apply this tit for tat solution to the employee manager relationship, which you don't want to be hostile? You know, it's not like you're competing against your manager there. So in the way I think about it is, you frame it as going along with what your manager wants versus pushback, pushing back and saying, I'm not happy about this. So the basic algorithm is, you go along with what your manager wants until they do something you don't like, at which point you go to them privately. You know, if they have an office, you shut the door, you say, I'm not happy, you know, and you explain why, and then you negotiate, see if you get anything. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but then you get back to work. You see, the concept is, you're making it clear that you're training them that if they do something you don't like, they're going to hear about it, and they don't want to hear about it. You know what I mean? Nobody wants conflict, or not many people want conflict. So they're not going to like that. And they may not be able to give you anything. They may not be able to accommodate you, but they'll learn that 2 things. One is that you're going to push back. And the other is you'll get back to work. This is a problem, but not a crisis. You know what I mean? You're trying to catch these problems when they're small so that they can learn what you really care about and what you're expressing. And also you feel better because you're standing up for yourself. You're not just going along with what they say and swallowing your objections. You're expressing them, but in a way that doesn't threaten the loyalty relationship and lets you build up a relationship with your boss so they know what matters to you and will try to take those things into account in the future. At least that's the idea. Now, some managers will refuse to be trained. You know, they simply will. They won't accommodate. Either they are incapable of it or they're unwilling to or whatever. But you see, by standing up for yourself, you've also built up a record of when you objected. So if you have your exit interview at HR and the first thing they ask you is, did your manager know you were unhappy? You could say, yeah, I pointed it out here and here and here and here, and you feel better about the whole thing as well. And the best part is some managers actually learn, you know, they actually do start to accommodate. And that's very helpful. So part of the whole approach is to use that in a non-threatening manner that helps the communication. And most managers actually don't mind hearing what you care about, as long as it's not a crisis. It's not you're not saying, I'm going to quit over this if you don't give me what I want. You're saying, no, I don't like this. And I know you had to do it. I get it. You know, in fact, here's an example. I have a friend, a woman in this particular instance, who worked for a town government in Connecticut. I live in Connecticut. But Eastern, not Western. So think Red Sox, not Yankees. Very important. Okay. Patriots, not Giants. You know, at any rate, she worked for a town government in Connecticut. And she got an idea for how to streamline a process that would save the town all kinds of money. So she went to her boss, happened to be a guy in this particular case, and she asked him for the budget and the time and the ability to work independently. And he said, sounds great. And he gave her the freedom to do it. And she went and did it, and it worked beautifully, saved the town all kinds of money. So she went back to him and said, you know, at the next town council meeting, I'd like to tell everybody about what we did, you know, and see how happy they are and everything. And was surprised when the boss responded, oh, I already did that. In other words, he took credit for all her work and got all the praise and everything. And she, of course, had the same emotional reaction we would all have, which is, well, that's how I'm going to be treated. If I'm going to get taken advantage of that time, I'm never giving this guy a good idea again. But what she actually did is she went home and she thought it over. And then applying this basic principle, she went into his office the next day and shut the door and said, I'm not happy. Now, I haven't been a manager a lot, but if I just got praise from the town council for doing something, and then that employee comes into my office, shuts the door and says, I'm not happy, you got my attention. Okay, really, what's the matter? And she said things like, look, I get it. You had ultimate authority on this. You did give me the budget and the time and everything. And I'm glad you got some reward for it. But you know what? I deserve something too. And then they negotiated, you know, what do you want? Yeah, it's a good idea. Do you want time off? Do you want an award? Do you want some, whatever it was? In her particular case, what she liked was the ability to work independently like that. So she wanted her choice of projects and to be left alone, which of course he was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. And then the next time there was success, he brought her along to the town council meeting to answer questions and to be there and represent and everything. You see, he took credit because, first of all, managers do that anyway. I mean, that's normal for especially higher level managers. In fact, that's part of the appeal of being a higher level manager is they say to their direct reports, yeah, okay, I took credit for your idea. When you're at my position, you get to do the same. And that's really frustrating for us because we're not in that hierarchy. We're never going to get that chance. Plus, we're the technical people. Most of our managers can't do what we do, you know, so it's really frustrating. But again, that's not unusual. And she can't just dig in and say, well, I'm never giving you a good idea again, because that's her job, you know. But instead, by doing the pushback, by negotiating, she may get something or may not. And then going back to work, he learns that, you know, you did something dumb here. Maybe you should handle this differently next time. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. In her case, fortunately, it did. And if it doesn't, well, okay, now you know that and you can build on that.
So I haven't had a manager in a long time, but I still work with clients and things like that. I guess the specific thing I would be curious about is you know, I get the negotiation and things like that and some of the, you know, desire for giving credit. I mean, you know, when you're in a consulting position, a lot of times you are letting your clients claim the credit. So there are a lot of parallels there. But I guess as you're teaching your manager, when is the line that you would want to walk? Because I mean, that line still exists. And I've always had it where there's a score to be kept. To your point, even in the tit for tat game, you're keeping score.
Yeah.
When is the score lopsided enough that it's time to start thinking about something else?
Well, I don't want to act like I'm ducking the question, but the truth is it depends. And it's basically individual to you and your manager. I would say the way I phrase it is everybody is continually examining their relationship with their manager, deciding, is this relationship worth salvaging? Is this going to work in the long term? And because, as you say, there's always going to be a line. Hopefully that line will be really far away, and it won't cause you to have to leave tomorrow. But there are things that any manager could do that would make any employee go, that's it, I'm out of here. Now, of course, if this crosses into the line of actual abuse or harassment, then that's a whole separate category. Yeah, there's no excuse for that. You have to do what you have to do. But in general, there's just so many details that have to do with you specifically and what you want and what your relationship is with your manager and what they want. I would say that even if you've made the decision to leave, even if you've gone, yeah, that's too much, I'm out of here, still push back anyway, because first of all, you're standing up for yourself. And secondly, they may wind up bending. You never know. But third, also, you're establishing the pattern that, look, I did object over and over again. Now I didn't get any satisfaction. I have to move on. So it really is going to depend on your freedom of movement. What freedom do you have to go get another job? Your constraints within the organization. A particular problem, by the way, that, it isn't going to happen to you, but for some people, bad managers do a lot of gaslighting too. Like when you push back and say you're not happy about something, they'll act like that was really unimportant and why are you so upset and all things like that. Whereas, the people in this call are established professionals. They know what matters to them.
No, but I think that can happen to anybody, right? So I think being in a situation where, being gaslit by folks, that happens in consulting too. Sometimes, most of the time it's the consultant doing the gaslighting, to be honest. But it can happen. It can happen at the client level as well. I think there's parallels there as well. And I think your point is that you have to establish where that boundary is, and it can be based on different criteria. But some of the things that I guess you're saying are maybe part of characteristics to look for, are they belittling my problems? That seems like a sign that repeated behavior, the score is not going to get better for me. Maybe it's time, but it also highlights kind of the power dynamic that's at play and why I think a lot of people maybe cower a bit in these situations is it's just like, well, my manager can do so much to me and I don't have that authority. As established professionals, a lot of the people on this call, we have a lot of options. If I'm newer in my field or I'm just starting off, are there different things I can do where maybe, hey, the manager isn't as, worried about me walking away? How does that work when the person is newer versus experienced? Why don't we talk about that?
One thing you pointed out, I definitely agree with, is the difference in power is significant. That's in fact what makes this so hard, is that nobody wants to get into a conflict with someone who has power over their job and their career and what feels like their life, that's really hard. So what I often say, and this holds true whether you're a new employee or a highly experienced one, is that the first time you do this, it's always stressful. It's always hard. And in fact, this is something you could practice with a friend. Get a friend together and say, okay, this time you're the manager and I got overlooked for promotion and I'm going to push back. Or I'm the manager and you didn't get your stock award in Bitcoin or something and you're going to push back, whatever it might be, and trade off and inject some humor and all of that. So the first time you push back against your manager, it's kind of nerve-wracking, both for you and the manager. But as long as you pick an issue that's not huge, again, just, hey, this bothered me. I didn't like this. I wasn't happy because it felt like you gaslit me. Or maybe it was someone, a micromanager who took over your job and reduced you down to just doing whatever they told you. Don't do it during the crisis. Don't do it while the crisis is going on. But when that's done, then you sit down in your periodic meeting, whenever that is, and say, look, I really didn't like that. Next time, give me more of a chance, and I'll try to establish more ability here. And I'll let you know problems earlier so that I can just take your advice and fix it rather than have you take over, for example. So it's really a question of establishing a pattern of pushing back whenever there's a problem, but doing it in such a way that each of the problems are relatively small and the manager comes to expect it. And they know what you're doing. They know that you're not saying, hey, we're in an argument here, and if you don't accommodate me, I'm out of here. It's like, look, this was a problem. Let's fix it. And then, or at least let me at least vent about it. Let me at least voice the problem.
Yeah. No,
and
that resonates.
As a manager, predictability is hugely appreciated.
Yeah.
So I believe the only person on the call that actually is a manager is my full-time job. I think that's true. Yeah. So I'm the pointy haired guy on the call. And so Ken, one thing I wanted to ask you about is just looking at the published date for this book implies that you've written most of it during COVID. As those of us who have written books before know the rough timeline for writing books. So you probably spent the majority of the book writing process during the pandemic. And I'm curious, I know for many people, their relationship with work in general, but also with their managers has changed in very material ways over the past 18 months or however many you want to count for the pandemic. How has the past pandemic influenced the book?
Well, first of all, the book started off as a talk on the No Fluff Just Stuff conference tour. I've been giving a talk called Managing Your Manager for about 7 years now, something like that. And then I went to the O'Reilly Learning Platform and I turned it into a course there and I made a video out of it. And I'd always threatened to write it all down, to make a book out of it. And then I had an editor leave O'Reilly and go to Pragmatic Programmers. And when she went over there, she said, hey, you've been talking about this book forever. You want to write it? And I said, oh, it's going to be really easy because I've been giving this talk for years. All I got to do is write down the talk. And she's like, okay, great. Yeah, how long is it going to take? Oh, a couple of months. It'll be simple. And of course, I was completely wrong. I mean, as soon as I started writing it, everything changed because there was so much fleshing out of, wow, I really have to think about this. And what happens if this happens and that happens? So your timeline is right, though. I finished the book before it, the Kotlin cookbook that I'd written, and then kicked into this right about a year ago, January. So really right before the pandemic kicked in. And this is effectively my, quote, pandemic book. Now, the pandemic was so stressful that it was hard to write even during that time. And the book that I thought I was going to struggle to get to be 100 pages wound up about 150 when all was said and done. Now, what the pandemic changed about it is the whole discussion about remote work. I mean, I used to talk about remote work as a little side point, a little special case in the book. But of course, then everybody became remote. And going back to that prisoner's dilemma idea, the idea behind the tit for tat solution is it absolutely relies on your manager being aware of what you want and trying to take your desires into account. And that's harder to do if you're not there. So I always say this is why it's even more important to have your periodic meetings. And by the way, every good manager I've ever met always wanted periodic meetings with all their direct reports. It's only the ones who are so new or uncertain or insecure or don't want to hear it that don't want the periodic meetings. But it was critical.
Also don't have proper mentorship.
That's a very good point as well. Absolutely. That's actually part of the problem with technical people getting promoted into management is first of all, they discover it's a completely different job. And secondly, they almost never get any significant training or help on how to do it. They're just trying to figure it out as they go. And that's really hard. And then when you combine that with the fact that everybody in an organization has to act like they know what they're doing, even when they don't, because otherwise nobody will trust you. Nobody will give you work to do. I mean, and managers have that problem even worse because they're trying to persuade people to do what they just decided. And that's not an easy thing. So they have to be confident about it. They have to express the confidence. Yeah, this is the right way to go, even when they don't necessarily feel it. So what I emphasize on the remote work part in the book is that you must establish some way of periodically meeting with your manager, and video. Well, if you can go there, great. But if you can't, video is better than voice. Voice is better than email. Something that allows you to do the nonverbal communication so that both sides understand each other better. So that's that. Now, there's a lot of other things in the book, too. If I could just give you one example, for example, this has helped me with managers over the years. There's a technique that I call good enough answers. This is something you can use right away, in your job. In school, when a teacher asks you a question, they have an answer in mind. And not only that, they know how they want to see it. I call this the game of school, figuring out what the teacher wants and how they want to hear it, totally separate from knowing the material, and we're trained in school to give the right answer in the way they want to hear it. And there's a big penalty for not having the right answer or partial credit or whatever. In the business world, when someone asks you a question, they're stuck. They don't have an answer. They need something. Like if I'm working with Git, there's a bunch of things I do all the time with Git, and therefore I don't have any problems. But if I have to do something I don't normally do, I'm in trouble. And I have a friend I'll email and say, how do I do this in Git? And then I wait and I wait and I wait. And I'm getting more and more aggravated. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do now. And then I'll run into this person on a call or something and say, why didn't you answer my email? And they'll say, well, I've got 6,000 unread emails. Yes. So why didn't you answer mine? And I may not say that, but I'm thinking it. And imagine how much worse that is coming from your boss, who expects you to be responsive. And one of the easiest way to build a loyalty relationship is to be responsive, is to respond to questions as quickly as practical. So what happens is your manager will send you an open-ended question. Like, should we be adopting reactive services or should we wait for Project Loom to come out? How's this going to affect our system? And your immediate thought is, how should I know? Yes.
That's the right answer.
Just yes.
Okay, how about this? You get a question like, how is the advances in AI and machine learning going to affect our primary product over the next 5 years?
That's interesting. So I almost disagree with you there because I think with some managers, it is the teacher problem. They already know which answer they want you to give. And they just want you to say it so you can take ownership of it. I've been in that position before where I ask the question where I know the answer that I want. And my hope is that you're answering that way because then it's a means of getting somebody to own it. So I think there's probably a mix. I mean, to be fair.
But that's a really good point, actually. Yeah. No, I like that. And again, I wish I talked to you before I finished the book.
It sounds like the book is full of a ton of, not letting things fester, getting frequent contact. That for me, early career was one of the toughest things. I was at a job 7 years before I left, and there were a lot of reasons I left, and a lot of them were because I just kind of let them fester, and then it got to the point where it's like, I gotta go.
Yeah, and then the next thing that comes along is going to cause the blow up, and the manager won't know why. So it's got to be very quick, rapid feedback. And again, half the time you want to give feedback, you're like, should I really bring this up? Is it really that big a deal? And the answer is yes and yes. It just doesn't feel like that. It took me years. Most of the lessons in the book are because I made all these mistakes over my career. I ran into these problems. Like I have a whole chapter called Your Boss is Not Your Friend. I have a whole chapter called that. Because it's so easy to fall into that trap if you watch television. On television, every possible show that involves an office, not only do people eventually become friends, the manager becomes this parental figure, and nobody ever leaves because then the actor would have to leave the show.
I'm thinking of The Office, though. So,
well, even there, doesn't everybody ultimately become a sympathetic character in one way or another, And
I need a mug.
Yes.
Oh, God.
Exactly. You understand. So I try to emphasize that that's television. That's not real. In the real world, people come and go all the time. People don't build their entire social relationship around their boss. Now, if you have friends with your coworkers, well, so be it. The power dynamic is not the same. You know, you can be friends. They're not directly impacting your career in the same way your boss is. But your boss is not your friend. And I say this because I personally need the emotional distance, the shield, so that when my boss does something I don't like, I don't take it personally, like it was a friend betraying me or something like that. Also, if you think your boss is your friend, you'll tell them things that you would only tell friends, you know? Oh, how you doing this? How'd the weekend go? Oh, well, my wife's all unhappy. I'm spending too much time at work and the kids are acting up and I need to help them. Meanwhile, the boss was thinking, you know, I was toying with the idea of giving this person a promotion, but I don't want to cause them extra stress. You don't want them thinking that at all, you know? Your boss is not your friend. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be friendly. You absolutely can be friendly, but in any relationship where there's a power dynamic like that, a power mismatch, you have to treat it like a professional relationship and act accordingly.
Your boss is your poker buddy.
Well, then you have to decide how much you decide to lose. How much of the ante? Like, are you thinking Brian Getz also? Is that the idea?
Oh, well, I don't know. So I haven't played poker with Brian Getz before. So, I mean, you're making it sound like that's a very dangerous endeavor.
Well, he's got quite the reputation. He spent a couple of years in the 90s doubling his salary, basically traveling up and down the West Coast playing poker. No. He goes to this one group I know, a gathering of developers, and he goes there. The rumor is, of course, it's just a story, but the story is he doesn't actually have money for the flight home because he knows these couple of people are going to show up and he's just going to win the money from them so that he can buy his ticket home. Anyway, if you're going to play poker with Brian Getz, just hand him your wallet. It's just going to be less painful that way.
But yeah, Josh, what's your opinion about what's being talked about?
I definitely agree with what I'm hearing, and I think it's great to have feedback with the manager. You know, you have to always let them know gently in some cases, you know, if you're not happy about something that they've done. I definitely am in agreement with what's been discussed so far. You know, I don't think it's a bad thing to be friendly with your manager, you know, but I do know that there is a line. So, you know, it's that way in any big business or any corporation or wherever you may work, even if it's a small startup. You know, there's definitely that relationship that you have to kind of keep that line, so that just as Ken had mentioned there, you know, you're not giving them signals that are going to cause some detriment to your career path in the future.
And in fact, I can give you a little example of that. I'm a lot like Bob. I'm actually a one-person company. So I do have managers in a way in that I have some long-term relationships with like Gradle and a couple other companies like O'Reilly, but also I have different clients and a lot of the same principles apply. You know, and I did spend like 20 some years in companies where I dealt with this. Why am I justifying myself? At any rate, the example I want to mention is I have often teach training classes. And one of the clients I work for a regular basis runs a training company down in the Atlanta area. And every time I travel to Atlanta, for whatever reason, whether it was for him or not, I'd look him up and we'd go out to dinner and we'd have a bottle of wine and we'd have a great time. And the whole time in the back of my head, I'm going, your boss is not your friend. Your boss is not your friend, because I know this guy. And as friendly as he is, if it comes down to a business decision where he'll offer me a class and I say, okay, I got to get back to you on this, I may get back to him and I say, yeah, I had to give it to someone else. And he did it as a business decision. It had nothing to do with me, but I can't think of him as a friend. You know what I mean? I have to think of it as a professional relationship. The barrier I'm building is not friendship. It's a protection for myself, so that when he does something like that to me, I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, I get it. He did it for his company. I did what was best for my company, if you will.
That's bi-directional though, because I always want to have professional relationships with my clients rather than friend relationships. They should be able to fire me if I don't make sense there anymore. Just like I should be able to walk away if it's like, I'm not helping you anymore. And I've got other things that I could be doing for other clients. So, you know, you do need to have that understanding. And that's why I think, you know, it's helpful even for potentially, if you don't have a manager, some of that does apply to client work, I guess, as well.
I had a friend who was a manager tell me after one of these courses that I taught, he said, one time one of his employees was unhappy about being passed over for something. It was a project, I think, and said, I thought you were my friend, which meant he fell right into the trap. And the manager replied, look, if you were really my friend, you would have done this work and not put me in this position in the first place. So yeah, it's symmetrical. Now, the thing is, though, is that the manager's on the more powerful side of the relationship. So they may think of you as a friend. You know what I mean? They may, in fact, if you follow a lot of these practices, they're going to want you around. They're going to like having you as a friend. I, as the weaker party in the relationship, need the mental protection. The emotional distance is probably the best way to say it, so that I don't get hurt when they do something I don't like. I don't have to sit them down and say, hey, you're not my friend anymore. I just try to be careful so that I'm aware and I keep it in mind. That's all.
It's better when you're having those truthful conversations with them too, because if it's like, you should feel comfortable firing me as well as I should feel comfortable walking away, I feel like you can kind of say more what's on your mind as well. Okay. You're not trying to not hurt their feelings. You're trying to guide them to make better decisions. And even as an employee, if you're not worried about your manager firing you or passing you over for promotion because you have a bi-directional relationship, it takes time, as you're mentioning, to build. Everybody kind of benefits. You're almost defining win-win situations rather than, your prisoner's dilemma that you started with.
In a nutshell, the win-win is the whole idea. If you're in a win-lose relationship with your boss, you've already lost, because even if you win, you're in trouble. But if you can find ways for both sides to win, and the concept is there are ways to do that because you want different things, you can get satisfied what both sides want and not have a problem with that. At least that's the goal. That's what we're working toward. If it turns out you can't, well, at least then you've tried,
Yeah, no, I think that just to wrap it up, like, it's one of those things that to progress in your career, you have to have that managing up. Like, it's not something you can put under under the carpet. It's not something you can ignore. You have to actively work on it. And I think, Ken, that book and that knowledge that you're creating on that with that literature is something that is sorely needed, because we're engineers. We love just fixing things. and sometimes it's very hard for us to get out of that and really deal with people. But in like you said, in order to progress in this career, or any career really, you have to have the ability to engage and do something that is a little bit uncomfortable for all of us, which is engage with your manager and say, like, look, I didn't like this, or look, how can we work together? And like you said, have that emotional barrier for avoiding you, understanding that he still has a position of power, and you have your own way of protecting against that. So
let me just add a couple tail things there. First of all, I've written a bunch of Medium articles that discuss a lot of this stuff for the Pragmatic Programmers group. So that's all available if you want. Also, I'm going to give you a coupon code for the ebook version at the Prag, so that I'll supply it to you. You can add to the show notes. You have to let me know when this is going to go up, so I make sure the code is good for that period of time. But it'll be worth a 35% discount on the book. So make sure they do that. And more than happy to. And also, I do have where I discuss some of this stuff as well as all sorts of things. I have a free weekly newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side. That is hosted on Substack, and I'll give you a link to that too. And I don't know how, but I've been managing to crank that out every week for about 2.5 years now. Yeah. So that's always going to be going on, and it's got humor in it and all kinds of silly stuff too. So just letting you know, and I'll give you're more than welcome to share my email address and other contact information. I'd love to hear stories, because this stuff always generates stories.
No, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, Ken's newsletter is amazing. I don't know how you find the time and curated all this stuff. It's just the right size. So definitely you got to go and subscribe to read it. Perfect. I think that we're top of the hour and a half. It's been very, very enlightening. And is like every other time that I get to talk to you, Ken, I learn so much. So it's always fun to have you around. Definitely. So with that, I think we finished this episode of OffHeap. This is Freddie signing off.
I'm signing off.
Josh signing off.
Michael signing off. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at OffHeap. And if you're viewing this on YouTube, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, please.
And thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I've been a big fan of the podcast for a long time. And I mean, even with Freddie, I've been happy with it.
I know, right? Like you still tune in. So you still showed up knowing who was here. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. All right, we did it.
All right.
Okay.
Stopping the recording.